in the spirit of a Microsoft Teams call here, I just want you guys to introduce yourselves. If you could give me your title, how long you've been working with Atomic Mass Games, and a fun fact about yourself. Who wants to start?
I can start. I'm Michael Plummer. I'm a senior game developer here at Atomic Mass Games. I've been here for about 2.5 years. And as far as a fun fact, my hobby that is not miniatures is I juggle.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
That is very cool. That's very fun.
I thought so.
You better be juggling the next time I see you, because I don't think I've ever seen you juggle.
Really? That's shocking.
Really.
Yeah, great.
I know.
The next time we're in the office, I will juggle.
I'm just going to give you random objects to juggle, though. That's the challenge.
You can actually throw them at me one at a time, and I can start juggling them. Like, I can do that whole thing. It's very cool.
That is really cool.
I'm 100% in on this next Tuesday when we're in the office. It's going to be great.
Juggling some gauntlets.
Done.
Oh, man. The little flippy wings would make that extra hard, too. There's a bit of danger to it. You can get stabbed.
Be a challenge. Now, I know what's happening on Tuesday.
So I'm Will Shick. I'm the director of product development for Atomic Mass Games. Fun fact, I was one of the original founders of the studio, so I've been with it since the very beginning, before anyone even knew it was a thing. And fun fact about me, I used to vocal for a metal band back in high school and early college, so there you go.
That's also pretty cool.
That's fantastic.
It's not quite juggling, though.
It's hard for us.
You can't pull that out at parties very often.
I mean, yes, you can. They'd probably both be about as popular, honestly.
You've never played, Will, you've never played like Rock Band or Guitar Hero? They have the vocal section. I mean, come on.
I have done that, yeah. But those games I don't like because they're very specific about, they only care about your pitch, not really anything else.
Yeah.
So even if you do the metal songs and you do them correctly, it still like tells you that you're doing it wrong. So
they never appreciate your artistry, right?
Yeah, you just go to karaoke. That's if you're gonna do it, you just go to karaoke. Yeah. Blow out the speakers there. Dallas Kemp is renowned for doing that. Our creative director.
So we can find the AMG guys at karaoke in the area, wherever.
100%.
There you go.
If you go to Gen Con and we're there, we'll always be at one of the karaoke bars in the evening. So you might randomly see an AMG person up on stage doing karaoke.
Phenomenal. That's great. Matt, what about you?
I'm Matthew Corser. I am one of the co-hosts of the Best Spin Benchwarmers podcast. And a fun fact about me is I have played through the entirety of the Mass Effect video game trilogy as each class. So I've beaten the game more than 6 times. I have an unhealthy obsession with the Mass Effect franchise, but I have beaten it as a soldier, Vanguard, Sentinel, Infiltrator, all those things.
That's dedication for sure.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, I guess I'll go last here. My name is Nick Sperry. I am the founder and the main guy at 312 Squadron here. We're based here in Chicago. And we mostly specialize in X-Wing. Of course, that's why we're here. And Star Wars games and kind of, random things in between. Matt is here to represent the podcast side of the X-Wing community. And I'm here to represent the live streaming video side. And thought we'd put our two heads together and get you guys here to talk about the game that we love. And appreciate you guys making the time. Fun fact about me, I don't want to avoid that, is that I've been playing softball recently, baseball and softball, and a few years ago I tapped into the fact that I'd never really tried to bat left-handed, but I can hit left-handed very well, and so I'm just kind of switch hitting now, just when my team is up by a lot of runs. Yeah, it's still a little nerve-wracking because it's not something I did as a kid, but it's very fun. So I've been enjoying that this summer.
Nice.
Yeah, so a little bit of everything there. We got Mass Effect, we got juggling, we've got heavy metal music, singing. That's great. And baseball, apparently. So cool. Yeah, let's get this show on the road. Appreciate the introduction, guys. So talking about inspiration, motivation, and the reason why we're here, what made you want to become a game designer? And what is one game that you hold close to your heart as the most inspiring or a pivotal part of why you're here?
Plummer went first last time, so I'll go first this time. I actually never really expected that I was going to wind up doing game dev. I assumed that this was just always going to be a hobby and I would play tabletop games forever like I liked to do. And just randomly kind of stumbled into the industry a little bit, applied for a job on a lark that I thought I could do, thought it would be fun, and then realized I had a bit of a knack for it, apparently, because they kept moving me on up. Got to work with some amazing folks, which kept me in it, like Michael Plummer here, who we've touched base a couple of times. The tabletop industry is kind of incestuous. You wind up working with people over the course of time, and people go one place and then you wind up coming back together at a different place. It's kind of fun, pretty tight-knit community. But I think like when I kind of realized that I had a knack for it was, or like a passion for it was, the ability to just be creative and be creative with other people, to me was always really exciting. So I just, well, I never like sought it out. Some of my favorite moments were when we'd sit in meetings together with a bunch of people and be like, okay, what are we making next? Like, what's next on the horizon? And oftentimes I found that, you know, my ideas were typically well received and they often made it into the final cut. So I was like, oh, maybe there's something there. But for me, it was just fun. It was exciting to be able to kind of like dive in and do stuff. And I think when you play games a lot as a hobby, you see things where you're like, oh, I really like this, but I feel like they could have done this a little differently, or I would have done this if I was kind of in charge of the idea. And it's a lot like cooking. You know, you sample a lot of different dishes and then you go home and you want to like make the meal yourself, but you want to make it the way that you would like it or the way that you think it would taste best. And then, you know, if you're lucky, people really like the way that you kind of assemble things. And so it just kind of went one thing to another. And I had the opportunity with the Atomic Mass to really just try, you know, what I wanted to do and the way I thought things would work with people who were like-minded and mostly agreed with me. And when they didn't, they had really good reasons not to. And so we kind of worked through the no's together. And that's another really big thing about it, is finding opportunities to work around the no's or the problems and come up with creative solutions to that rather than just bulldozing your way through because you want it one way. And so that was kind of like the journey. And it all started with the game that I hold near and dear to my heart is Classic Battletech, because that was my very first miniatures game. I got it when I was like 8 or 9 in my Easter basket because I saw it at the local bookstore in my tiny small town, because they had like a little D&D like RPG section, but FASA of course was big at the time, and I'm from Great Falls, Montana. So
okay. Gotcha.
Pretty much not quite the middle of nowhere, but it's close. We're definitely located amidst the middle of nowhere. And yeah, I got that game, and that's a heck of a game for a 9-year-old to start to learn to play with all the charts and everything. But I got my friends into it. We had a blast, and that led to an entire life, basically, 30-some plus years now of tabletop miniatures games of various forms and from various companies, and now Atomic Mass Games. So I gotta put it at the top. I still have that copy of that game in my garage, actually. And it's in the garage because I don't play it anymore. But I could. I could.
It's there. Yeah. Well, that's how we hobbyists are, right? We always have it there. It's right there.
Exactly.
Whenever we want to.
It's just nice to have the option.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if it's ever not there anymore, you will feel it. Trust me. I've gotten rid of a few games in my days, and I have my regrets.
Yeah. Imagine.
I guess I'll go ahead. I'll try not to be too long-winded here, but for me, as far as like what game has been the most inspirational for me, it all started with The Legend of Zelda. When I was a little kid, I played Zelda for the first time, and like it was the first time that I ever got really like drawn into a game, and I realized that I could explore new worlds and like see these cool stories and fight dragons and stuff. And that was just mind blowing for my 8 to 10-year-old self. Like I just loved it. I loved every minute of it. And to this day, I play pretty much every Zelda game that comes out, at least for a little bit, at least to check it out and see what it's all about. Like I love that franchise, and those games kind of brought me into it all. And that brought me towards like playing tabletop RPGs and eventually to miniatures games. And I played a lot of miniatures games growing up. And like I went to college, and I promised my parents I would stop playing miniatures games while I was at college because I was spending so much time on it. And they were convinced that my grades are bad. They were fine. They were convinced that my grades would do better if I didn't play miniatures games, and they were wrong. But then I got out of college, and I went into like the depressing life of, post college, just trying to survive. And I went back to miniatures games when it was hard. And like when I moved to Chicago and I didn't know anyone, the people that I met playing miniatures games. And then I started going to conventions and things like that. And I've always been kind of really passionate about trying to do something that I love. I was in Chicago to act. So I did that. And then I ended up moving into working in the miniatures game industry, which was cool, but definitely not doing any sort of like game design or dev. I was an events manager. So doing a lot of logistical stuff that was very much in my wheelhouse with great people, being around the thing I loved all the time, which was awesome. And then I decided to get out of the industry and just go make some more money and do something a little more like 9 to 5. I don't have to worry about it on the weekend because I don't care. And that was also a mistake. And then the pandemic hit and I lost that job because office managers is needed when people weren't going into offices. And it was this really great opportunity for me to try and like realign with my core purpose, I guess, of trying to have jobs that I'm passionate about and do things that make people happy. And then the job opening appeared at Atomic Mass Games. And I knew Shick, like he said, from working with him in the past and a few of the other people on the team. I knew that they were great people to work with and that they were people I respected and wanted to add my energy to the kind of cool stuff they were making. And I applied and I was lucky enough to get the job. And now here I am. And it's been a ride. It's been a lot of learning. It's been a lot of challenges, but you know, I work with great people and we always come together and put our heads together and try and make the best thing that we can. And I love it.
Oh, well said. I mean, two things. One, it's a great time to be a Legend of Zelda fan. It is very good time. So you're in good company. And the second thing, I didn't know you lived in Chicago. That's really cool.
I did. Quite a few years.
Wow. So when you head back, when you're here for Adepticon, it's like reminiscing a little bit, right? Even though it's in Schaumburg.
Absolutely.
You know.
I have to get a Chicago dog. Like it has to happen every time I go because that is the quintessential Chicago food to me. Yeah. I have special memories of that city.
Absolutely. I love that.
You talking about Zelda reminds me, like my son back in January, I was playing Breath of the Wild. He's like, hey, I want to try that out. And I'm like, yeah, sure. Go ahead. And like, that has been his obsession for almost half a year. Anytime he's playing the Switch, he's playing Zelda. Anytime he's not playing the Switch, he's drawing Zelda characters or coloring in Zelda characters. And I'm just like,
that's awesome.
I didn't know there was all this to know about Zelda, but I'm glad that you love it. So
right. I love that. That's a good game to get into when you're young too.
Yeah.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
All right. So this is a big question, but if at a high level, guys, can you take me through the process of designing releases for the game of X-Wing, and what is the journey from idea to concept to hitting the shelves like?
Yeah. So I mean, the first big thing to know about design and development for gaming stuff in general, especially with what we do, is it takes a long time. So you know, we have a minimum 24-month cycle between all of the different stages that we do internally, and then it goes to production and shipping and all of that because you got to ship it globally. And then when you throw in something like X-Wing, which is pre-painted and pre-assembled, there's some extra steps, so it can take even longer than that. So it is a world in which you're thinking very, very far into the future and trying to make your plans appropriately, and then react as you can. Obviously, you know, we're working even ahead of the Star Wars media in terms of just when we have to plan things out and when we have to know things. And sometimes we get to align with LFL a bit and get the inside scoop, and we rush to get something out more closer to the day on date, and we continue to explore options with that. But for the most part, right, like it takes longer for us to make a miniature than it does for a movie to actually be made, which is completely wild. So the way in which production really works is that we sit down and we analyze like where we are with the brand, what the game needs, like where do we want to go. So there's a bit of a research step up front, like what is it missing? The biggest question that we always ask ourselves is what's valuable? What's going to bring value to the game? What's going to actually be, you know, desirable for players, not just because it's a new thing to like add to your collection, but because it does something that moves the game forward or that progresses the overall like player experience. And that might be answering a question that exists, or it might be setting up a question for the future. We do try to look at things holistically. We know that we're on this journey for a long, long time. So sometimes as a game designer, you want to introduce things that you know are going to be challenging for players to figure out, but then you also know that you can create solutions to those problems, right? You don't want things to break the meta, but you want things that bend it or push it in different directions as well. So once you've established that, you know, and sometimes it's really easy, like, hey, there's a new ship. that just showed up in this piece of media. We should definitely do that because it's a cool starfighter, and that makes it easy. And then you just kind of figure out the rest of the development around it as you go. We have a lot of meetings with LFL where we pitch our ideas and we say, this is what we want to do. These are the pilots we're thinking of for this. And we have a conversation with them. And sometimes they'll say, hey, you can't do this thing for X, Y, or Z reason. And we'll come back and we'll say, okay, but what if we did it this way? Or are there opportunities to do something else around the same idea? And that's one of the amazing things about working with great partners like LFL is that the no is there, but it's not like a brick wall, right? You can always have a conversation about it. And there are very few things that you can't work around the no or creatively problem solve the no to get close to what you want. And usually the thing that you wind up at is better than the thing you originally pitched, which is pretty fantastic. At that point, our tracks really start with the product gets approved. Elf says, okay, go ahead and do that. It's like, fantastic. Let's get started. Now the real work begins. In the case of X-Wing, it's got to go to concepting. So Dallas Kemp and the creative team creates a concept for it. That's going to go to sculpting and the sculptors who are going to create the actual physical model of it in their sculpting program, which will then become the miniature eventually after it goes through engineering. So that track takes a while. You have the dev and design portion of it where, folks like Michael Plummer and the rest of the dev team step in and they start creating the rules and they figure out what it's going to be. And at a similar time as that, the dev and design team is also working with the artists because we need to work with the art directors. We need to get art for this stuff. We need to let them know what's coming. So there's really 3 distinct tracks that are kind of all happening concurrently. And that's where a lot of, being very in contact with each other and talking about how things are going is really important. By the time everything comes to a close, then we have what's called an assets ready date. At that point, all of the stuff goes to the graphic design team, and the graphic design team actually takes all these disparate elements and they put them together to create a product. So, they lay out the cards and they do the packaging and they do all the stuff, right? Everything that's super necessary for us to be able to put a product on the shelves and let players be able to get it. At that point, by the time we're done, we go through a whole lot of proofing and a whole lot of checking, and we do our best to tear the thing apart and make sure that it's all perfect, and we put it back together as best we can. And then when we think it's when it's gold master, as we call it, we send it off. And at that point, it's out of our hands, but it has a whole nother year basically to go through production. And we, as the game studio and the Asmodee system, you kind of think of us like the band. I'll go back to the metal music, right? So we create the music and we cut the record and we lay down the tracks for the record, but it's actually the publisher, which is Asmodee, which does all the heavy lifting of creating the products, getting them through the production process. There's a lot of touch bases back with us. We do a lot of proof checking. We do a lot of reviews with things like X-Wing. This takes a lot of time because we have to check the paint samples every time. So we say, hey, we want it painted this way. And we send them a physical sample of how we painted it. And then it's back and forth with the factory to make sure that they're getting everything right the way we want it. And we're compromising on things where they're just we can't do this in a mass production mini. You're going to have to maybe think of it this way, or we're going to have to change this or that. And of course, every change that we make has to go back to LFL. So you see why the process takes a long time. There's a lot of different checks and balances to make sure that we're making the best possible thing we can. And then at the end, it finally, gets on a boat and it goes slowly across that boat to the globe and it hits all the stores, and then everyone finally gets to have it. And of course, as that production process is going, the last kind of portion of the whole product cycle goes, and that's marketing. And so our fearless marketing team gets out there and they start doing articles and they do social posts and they, create all the hype and excitement behind this thing so that everyone knows that it's coming. And by the time it hits the stores, there's a frenzy to go get it. So it's a crazy, for when you look at an X-Wing ship, you're like, oh, this thing's very small, but there's so much work that gets jam-packed into that tiny little thing. Just in order to get it there, and it's a long time, and we think about that stuff constantly.
There used to be that old running gag that it's on the boat that X-Wing players used to joke around with. It's very much true, though. I mean, it literally was on the boat, and I always found that to be funny because it's that was phraseology that was used when updating people on where a product was. It's on the boat.
Yeah,
that was the case. It was literally the boat. That is the hope. I mean, the worst part, we always joke internally that the first 80% is the fastest and the last 20% takes 90% of the time, right? And being on a boat is basically like that. You're just okay,
when does it actually show up though? And they're like, oh, soon.
Yes,
soon-ish, you know. But
which boat is it on? One of them.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Yeah, a boat, you know.
And for the people that don't know, just like I'm familiar with Lucasfilm, but could you tell us what LFL means, just for those that maybe don't know?
So LFL is just shorthand for Lucasfilm Limited, which of course is the fantastic group behind Star Wars and the other Lucasfilm media as well. But they're effectively the group that we go to anytime we're working on a Star Wars product. They hold the license for Star Wars, so they own it. We license it from them in order to be able to make cool things within the Star Wars galaxy. And we have a whole team over there that we work with. So, you know, it's not just like, go make Star Wars things, young child, enjoy your life. It is very much a very tight partnership where, you know, it's super important to them that they make sure that everything with Star Wars is, you know, to their standards and meeting whatever vision they have for the overall galaxy, where it's going, what storylines are going on, that kind of stuff. So it is definitely I have a regular standing meeting with them, along with a few other people from Atomic Mass Games, our head of studio, Simone Elliott, and our creative director, Dallas Camp. We have a meeting with them once a week for sometimes up to 3 hours, where we just go through things and we talk about stuff and we have discussions about things and we get things approved and all that. So it's fantastic. I never really pictured that as part of the process necessarily. But I'm super thankful that they are such an active and great partner in that way, because it just makes everything that we do better. And it's probably one of the most productive meetings of my week.
Fascinating. That's really cool. Michael, anything to add?
I know that what Shick said makes it sound like it's this huge, long process, and I don't think he made it sound huge and long enough. Because I think he mentioned the dev cycle for like 2.5 sentences, and that 2.5 sentences is like 6 to 8 months of concept design. Oh, the design doesn't work. Let's talk about a new design. That one also doesn't work. Let's go back to the first one and fix it. Internal playtest, external playtest again. Like, it just goes on and on. And that's just my one piece of it. So yeah, like it's amazing to think like how many hands touch these things and how much work goes into them. It's truly amazing that they happen at all. And I think it's really impressive.
And the hilarious thing about it too is because it takes so long for the product to get off the boat. By the time that we're actually like using it again or talking about it, or we get our hands on the final product, it's almost as new to us as it is the community, because it's been, a year plus where we're just like, oh, I remember this thing. I was super excited for this. Oh, this is amazing. I can't wait to do this again. Right. So it's funny because in some ways we get the joy of like discovering a new thing twice, because we go through the process where we're like making the thing and then we ship it off and we're like, oh, we're so excited. And then your best friend goes off and you both go to college in different spots and you meet up like a year later. You're like, oh my God, I haven't seen you in forever. You're as awesome as I remember. This is so great. So it's wild. It's very, very weird. And of course makes you have a bit of a Swiss cheese brain, because not only do you have like 7 different versions of things that might be right, you also are thinking currently about the stuff you're working on now, which is coming out in 2+ years.
Yeah.
And then trying to remember like what the thing is that you made before, because you're kind of just in the same track of like remembering it. And that leads back to the fact that playtesting is a hilarious system that I don't think anyone truly understands how it works.
I used to playtest for X-Wing. It was a very fascinating experience. Yeah.
It is not a game. It is like what you're doing is you're basically like pushing things around, and you're having so many conversations about what is the optimal situation for this.
Right.
And what happens if we rewind and do this? Like, you do the same term about 15 times, and you'll cheat dice rolls and you'll keep dice rolls, and
that's the hardest part, like, to get used to, because I think everyone knows that moment when you're playing a game, especially X-Wing, where like someone makes a mistake and you're like, yeah, I'm going to capitalize on this. This is perfect. This is excellent. And then the person across the table goes, oh wait, that was stupid. I should do this instead. We're going to do that. And you have that moment where your brain shuts down. You're like, you're not allowed to do that.
Wait a minute.
You're absolutely allowed to do that, because you want to test what would happen if they don't do the dumb thing. So you have to train yourself to not care about winning and care about learning. It's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, that was it. When I would play test, I would have to get used to the fact that it was okay for me to lose. Like just the way that I would process it. It's like it just doesn't even matter, right? Gotta completely change.
Every game has a winner and a loser, and it doesn't matter which one you are.
Yeah, it's all just about what you're playing with. Yeah, for sure. I mean, speaking of playing, break down for me, what is your favorite part of the game of X-Wing, and do you have a favorite pilot or chassis, ship?
My favorite part of the game of X-Wing has got to be the end of the planning phase. I call it the moment. And it's when you have your last dial in your hand and the person you're playing against has their last dial and it's the moment. You've got to decide, like, this is it. When I put this down, I'm done. Do I want to change something else? Am I done? Am I finished? And you look at them and they're having that same moment. And that's it for me. That's the game of X-Wing in a nutshell. It's that tension between two people when they know they have to make a decision and then they have to live with it. That is some tension right there. And I'm into it on a deeply personal level. And my favorite pilot, my go-to, has got to be Ahsoka Tano, RZ-1A Wing, Rebel Alliance for life.
Such a dynamic piece in that faction with the ability.
Oh yeah,
so
much fun.
Phenomenal.
I had a lot of fun with her.
So my answer for my favorite part of X-Wing is close to Plummer's, although mine happens right after. So the part that I love in X-Wing is I love watching the resolution of like the dials getting flipped over and then watching the ships kind of move. I think the way the system handles, quote unquote simultaneous movement, or at least abstracts the idea of like all of these ships, all these little starfighters like zipping around at the same time, is not only pretty genius, but it's also really fun to watch. It's a little bit like I always have this special place in my heart for Robo Rally, because I thought the programming step and the way the little like robots rallied around is so fun, because you know what you've done, but you don't know how it's going to turn out. And that, much like the anticipation of laying the dial down and be like, okay, I've committed, seeing how the commitment turns out and watching as, you're like, I totally pulled off the perfect maneuver there. Look at me. I'm amazing. And then watching the heartbreaking disaster of, man, that was the worst move I could have possibly made. And now my ship's going to blow up probably. What was I thinking? Right. Mm-hmm. I love that roller coaster of the emotional high and low on both sides. And I think it's so fun because on the one hand, you made the decision, and on the other hand, it has this very natural, like, you're just watching the pilots make these choices, and did they choose right or did they not? It really lends the feel to like how dogfighting and kind of the Star Wars media portrays ship to ship combat, and it's just fun. It's fun, and I very often have to hoop and holler and then like loudly bemoan all of the different cruel choices that fate, i.e. myself, made for my poor ships. And then as far as like my favorite ships or my go-to ship, well, I love the RZ-1A Wing. I think my favorite has always been the TIE Interceptor, and Soontir-Fel, of course, is the quintessential, interceptor pilot. Like again, this probably goes back to my somewhat manic view on like the highs and lows of game. I love games that take you to like the tip top of Everest and then immediately throw you off, crashing into the ravine. I think being emotionally like invested in a game so much that it's exciting. Interceptors are a lot like that. Like when you're in control and you're making all the right moves, you're just like, I am untouchable. I am God. And then all of a sudden you make one little mistake and you're like, well, I'm dead. So great.
It's the range 3 obstructed shot when you have an evade is always the way that you die with Soontir-Fel.
Yeah. Oh yeah. 100%. You just roll some dice. You're like, well, that happened. Great. And it's just like, it's over in a second. So, I find that to be so fun, and even when it's my interceptors blowing up, that the payoff of just being untouchable for a little while, the true power of people just be like, this is not right, and then they finally like catch you, and you're just like, see, this is why it was right, because stiff breeze.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to add real quick, I mean, my personal favorite is always been Luke in the game of X-Wing, and I think him and Vader,
classic.
It's very cool to see. I love the game design behind Luke and Vader's abilities and just their initiative and everything about them. I've always thought that was the height of X-Wing, was just that you have these two ultra iconic face of the franchise characters who have always been playable, a lot of fun right out of the box. You can get in and play. whether you're a novice or competitive and have been playing for a while. And it's great. Soontir, you throw out Ahsoka, great examples of pilots who are just such a fascinating and fun part of your squad when you build them in there. So.
Yep, and you said Darth Vader, and Darth Vader is my go-to pilot. That's the whole reason I got into playing X-Wing. I just saw Darth Vader. I'm like, oh, that looks cool, and then here I am, thousands of dollars later.
Still
I think that's a lot of people's story for Star Wars is they saw Darth Vader and said, hey, that's cool, I'm in.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So what are your guys' impressions on the overall turnout and success of Worlds returning to X-Wing, and what are some of the things that stood out to you at Worlds?
So I mean, I like getting to go to AdeptCon 2023 and everything. It was a wild time because it was such a big reunion for so many people and kind of a return to normalcy in a way, you know. Obviously I don't think, you know, things happen in the world and in your life or in general to like populations, nothing ever is the same, but I think it was a big collective sigh of like, oh, we're back. And so in that way, I think it was a phenomenal success. You know, we obviously saw an amazing turnout for the Last Chance qualifier. We had a phenomenal response and kind of just group of folks running through the Worlds event, and the way in which the finals event like concluded was I was in the AMG booth, which was probably a good 100 yards removed from the X-Wing portion of the tournament hall, and I heard the huge communal like exclamation of excitement and disbelief, and like, you know, it was this primordial thing, and I had to walk over there and figure out what happened. So I just left the booth. I was like, I need to know what's going on. So I just kind of like walked away and wandered over there. It was phenomenal. You know, it was fantastic to hear people. You know, we got a lot of really great discussions with folks who came up and, you know, talked to us about things. They kind of laid out what they were concerned about. Their initial feelings on some of the bigger revisions that we made, you know, whether those things worked out for them or not. And it was good to hear, for the most part, that a lot of the people were like, I was hesitant at first, but I'm having a blast now. And I think, you know, that's always good to hear, but it's also great to hear where things are still a little rough. And so it just felt like another convention, but a convention that had been delayed by 2.5 years of nonsense. So it was very, very cool.
My Worlds experience was probably very similar to a lot of your listeners, viewers. I got to experience Worlds through the lens of Discord, and just watching videos on YouTube and watching the streaming, and it was electric. It was really cool to kind of experience this huge community event in that way, and like just kind of watching the chat scroll and people be excited about the games and talking about like what they would do. Like, you know, people are always talking like, oh, I would have taken this in this list instead of that. I think that X, Y, and Z and P and Q, and you see what happened in this game on turn 0. And it was just so cool to watch this huge group of people across multiple communities, because I was like Discord hopping, just trying to watch people enjoy the show, and just watching people be passionate about X-Wing and be excited about X-Wing. It's so cool. And I love it every time I see it. And I think that Worlds was a really great opportunity for like everyone that plays X-Wing to come together online and talk about the game and talk about like what was happening at you know, like the peak, the big game, as it were. So that was really fun for me, and I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, that final table being chance engagement, it keeps the game close. It's a seesaw, and it's like you couldn't have asked for anything better, really. I mean, like that was just quite a time. Now we all joke about having that dice cup rubbed down, you know, nothing like it. And shout out to Nicholas Scott, who is the world champion 2023 here for X-Wing. Sorry, go ahead, guys. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah,
didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're fine. So with scenario packs becoming a popular complement for the game, featuring accessible and ready-to-play standardized cards, do you think we may see future game modes in X-Wing revolve solely around standardized list building?
I would say probably not. I'm not going to say never, because you never know Like we could come up with something super cool and we have to do it. Like absolutely there's the possibility. But at the end of the day, like the whole idea behind standard loadouts is just that they're another way to play, and that it's two great tastes that taste great together, right? Like one of the core pillars of X-Wing is squad building your squad with the pilots that you love to fly and the ships that you like and the upgrades that you like and things like that. And we never want to remove that from the game because it's such a huge part of the experience. Shick has talked before about how having the ships is like having your custom hot rod racer, and you get to build it out however you want to. And that's such a fun and enjoyable part of the game. Standard loadouts are there because sometimes it's a lot of work to do that, and sometimes you just want to put some cards down on the table and play the game, or you want to have like a really narrative story driven version of a character that is from this specific battle, that like this is Luke Skywalker at the Battle of Yavin, right? Like very easy to throw that on the table, play a game with your friends, your kids, anyone, right? And sometimes those ships are also just really good and fun and you enjoy playing them, so we want to let people play with the things that they have that they enjoy playing. And I think that's kind of at the heart of what we're doing with formats in X-Wing. It's like, I think that games are the most fun when you can play with the most people. And so like standard and extended, standard exists so that it's really easy to find a game with anyone that is equal, and that, you know, people aren't going to be playing with ships that you haven't owned for 15 years. And in the same light, I don't see us making a format where we're going to remove all the fun and the enjoyment of list building and say you can only play with this small stack of cards. Like we want to give you more options, not less, generally speaking.
Yeah, just to cut in real quick, in talking about new players, I think standardized cards are phenomenal for getting new players into the game, because I think that's where the challenge is now as we move out of COVID and the game has been resurged, is getting more and more folks to play the game and making it easier to just jump in and play. Just grab that standardized card, put your ship together. That's great. I love that.
Yeah, it's been good. I've done the Siege of Coruscant a couple times with my son.
Oh, rad.
And he just here's Anakin Skywalker, here's Obi-Wan Kenobi and some clones, and have fun. And I think the standardized loadouts are a fantastic complement. And I love how thematic most of the standardized loadouts cards are.
Yeah, we get a lot of flexibility with the standardized loadouts because, you know, whenever you design a normal ship or a normal upgrade in X-Wing, right, you have to consider, okay, where does it break something, and how do you break it? With standardized loadouts, because they're fixed, you really have a lot more flexibility and creative freedom to do things that if you could put them on anybody, it would just break the game. Or if you could combine them with a different upgrade card, it would just be grossly overpowered. But because you have that self-contained box, we do get to do a lot more interesting stuff when it comes to like being really thematic and tight with that kind of things. So it is a very fun system, and it was born out of the idea of, you know, we want to continue to see the games grow. We want to see new people come in. How do we make that barrier of entry a little easier, and then also make pickup and quick play games a lot more accessible and fun as well for existing players who don't want to go through 20 different binders? Because I have the same thing. You know, my kids love playing X-Wing. I don't love building the lists for them and then trying to walk them through the cards, right? It's just like they only play once every couple months, or if they're really into it, it's like once a month. And it's like, if I can hand them that standard loadout, they're like, cool, I know how all this works, and we can just play and have a great time.
And I think they really fit well into the scenario packs too, because it just gives us an opportunity to say, like, as long as you play with these ships, like just build out of this, you will have the tools that you need. You can't mess this up too badly, right? Because you never want to end up going to the Battle of Yavin and you didn't bring any proton torpedoes. Like that's a bad day.
Yep.
So yeah, I think they work well together, and the opportunity to kind of put them into the larger meta fishbowl has been a lot of fun, and I think that people have been enjoying it. And I know that we have as well.
So with the return of store events and OP kits, can you speak to any future plans for organized play from small stores to grand championship level events?
I think the most exciting thing about OP that's changing is the inclusion of the world's invite in every store championship kit. Like the scene for X-Wing is huge. Like we just talked about on Discord, like everyone being so excited for Worlds, and not everyone can afford to go to every event to play in a regional qualifier and get their ticket to Worlds. And I'm sure that out there somewhere, there's some person who is amazing at X-Wing and wins every store championship, but just can't go to anything larger to win. And we want that person to have their chance to like come and take the cup, so to speak, take the crown, the belt, whatever it is you want to call it. Like, I think that's the most exciting thing about coming to OP. And then beyond that, like, we've got some cool in-store kits coming that are going to have some new fun scenarios to play with, interesting list building rules, and just new ways that you can play X-Wing with your existing miniatures and just have a great time playing with your friends. Really, really excited about everything coming out this year.
But you will.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think Plummer hit the nail on the head with the fact that the biggest thing, the biggest step we wanted to take with competitive X-Wing in general was opening up the ability for more people to be involved. I think the bigger your field is at Worlds, the more of a Worlds competition it is, right? And obviously everyone has circumstances and they have their own like responsibilities, and we don't want that to get in the way of finding like the next great X-Wing player. And I also think, you know, you talk about there are so many different levels of meta where as you start to drill down, all it takes is like that one weird community meta to come in and just shake everything up on everybody. So the World's invite in the store kit to me made a lot of sense, was definitely in a direction where we wanted to go. Like, and I'm excited to see how AdeptCon 2024 Worlds is impacted by that. It's been awesome to watch the excitement of everyone and to see stores be like, hey, we got this kit, we get to do this now, and to see the response from their community. You know, having an in-store event is always fun, but the World's invite gives it a bit more weight to those who are really passionate about going and testing their skills against each other. And even for the weekend warrior, you know, who's like, I don't really care about Worlds, but hey, I have a chance, right? I can go in there and maybe I get the invite, and then what do I do? Oh my gosh, how exciting. And then like the other thing is always, as we talked about at the start, right? Looking at ways to add value to players' collections, looking at ways to add value to the game. And value, by and large for us, is simply, does it bring more fun, more enjoyment to whatever we're looking at? So being able to do more of the narrative events, some of the other kits that are coming up that are not tournament focused, but more just let's take an awesome moment from Star Wars or an idea from Star Wars and inject it into X-Wing. And what does that do and how does that change things? You know, the scenario packs like Battle of Yavin and Siege of Coruscant are in the same vein. Not every game needs to be a standard, like we're going to play out of the tournament packet game. And it shouldn't be, because Star Wars is about more than just that, right? And we want to make sure that no matter how you want to engage with this awesome game, you have some opportunities and abilities to do that. And of course, you know, at the end of the day, right, the game overall lives and dies based on the excitement and the growth of the community. So stores are typically a huge proponent of making sure that a game in their area has success, and we want to support them as much as possible by giving them opportunities to do things for their community that raise the hype level and excitement. And as people come into the store and see these folks are having like a riotous good time, they're yelling and screaming about all this stuff, what's happening over there? They go over, they see these cool ships on the table, and they see people having a great time, and they realize that they could be part of that community, right? That's the inroads that brings just more players into the game, which is awesome too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, one of my favorite things that I'm playing is having new people come over that are just shopping at the store and be like, oh, what's this game? I'm like, well, why don't you sit down and let me explain it to you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that happens a lot. I was just like, what? I've had the pleasure of being able to demo X-Wing at a Star Wars Celebration when it was here in Chicago, which feels like eons ago, and at Gen Con 2019. And it's very cool to kind of be able to shepherd in people and give them your pitch. Like, you know, you're someone that knows and loves the game, and you're like, this is the game. They're like, that's so cool. You get to choose how you fly, and you get to fight Vader and Luke and, you know, X-Wings, TIE Fighters, all that cool stuff. It's absolutely. And yeah, the resurgence of the store champs, I miss them. Everybody missed them. And it's nice to be able to go to events that aren't Gen Con sized, right? Because that's a lot of effort, a lot of money. And for some people, it just can't happen. So that's a great point. Now, you guys had talked a little bit, Michael, specifically about Extended. So I do want to touch on Extended for the Extended folks out there, our Star Viper fans, our Phantom fans, and the Space Cows, aka the Lambda Shuttle fans, all that stuff. And as an E-Wing fan, Do you foresee future events of any level, or maybe even store champs, supporting the extended format of the game? And what does the future of extended play look like? And if you could speak to potential reprints or any plans to that, if you can, that'd be awesome.
I think extended, I would not expect to see extended as official events. Extended is exactly that, as an extension of the base game. We consider standard to be, this is the core of what X-Wing is. This is what you can go and purchase for X-Wing now and play the game and keep everyone on a level playing field. And of course, there are people that have collections that span a decade at this point that are going to have things that exist beyond that. And they are more than welcome to play those games with their friends that also have those ships and like, if you want to run a tournament and run it extended in your store, by all means, please run an extended tournament. Have a great time. Post your pictures on Facebook so I can see them, because I'm always going through the Discords and the Facebooks and I love seeing that stuff. But again, going back to what I said before about the best games are great because you have people to play with. Like, by keeping everything kind of focused on standard, on the standard experience that's available and open to everyone, that helps us meet our goals of just making sure that when you go to play X-Wing, like specifically if you're going to play a competitive X-Wing game or with someone that you don't know that you just met in the game store, you know everything that's on the table. You kind of know everything that's coming at you, and someone's not going to be, coming to the table with 6 ships that you can't buy because they haven't been out for 5 years. Like, that's not a great feeling. And so it's
like
not something that we specifically, it can feel that way. Sure. Yeah. It's just not something that we were going to put the focus of the game on, because that can leave a bad taste, but it's definitely something that we want people to have fun with. And so as we continue on doing points updates and things, we're always looking at extended ships. We don't forget that extended exists. We want to make sure that, like, when we lower point costs on things that exist in standard, if we just leave everything that's in extended, that's terrible. And then when you go to play extended, that's a horrible experience. So we want to make sure that people that are playing extended are still having a good time with the game and still able to engage with it in good faith and have fun in the same way that standard players are. But we need to maintain standard as, like, this is the core of the game, so that when everyone comes to the table, they have everything that's available to them in the same way as other players.
Yeah, sure. Especially, I mean, from a community building and, like, how do you grow the game standpoint, right? You want that system where everyone can come in and they have access to all the same things. Because, I think we mentioned it before, right? When we're talking about playtests, every person is hardwired to enjoy winning. You can be the most casual person in the world, but, like, when you win a game, you're like, I won. That's awesome. I never win. This is great. Woo. And then you go off and you go lose the next 100. But, like, winning is intrinsically enjoyable. And so, no matter where you lie on the spectrum of, like, what you're trying to get out of X-Wing, whether it's just plain cool Star Wars experiences with your friends by moving around these little cool ships, or if it's, I want to go to Worlds and win and be the best, I want to be the very best there ever was. Like, that is, all those different opinions and feelings are valid, but in order to make sure that all of those different, like, personalities and those different desires are hit, we have to make sure that the game isn't, by and large, as competitive and balanced as possible. And you can't call something balanced if there's simply a time, like, thing about, well, if you didn't play the game before 2.0, you're going to have access to things that no one will ever have access to, or they may not have access to for a long time. And in that way, that's kind of where we land on all the official events, all the things that lead, all the roads to Worlds will be standard. Okay. As Plummer mentions, though, you want to run an extended event, or you want to take one of the narrative events and run it extended, like, 100% do that, right? And I think that's fantastic and wonderful if it works for your community, because we don't know what your community is. And I would be shocked to not see, if we don't see some extended events run at, like, larger events and tournaments, because I think that, there's a big player base out there that wants to be able to play in that. It's no different than a lot of the CCGs out there, right? There are definitely formats that are pretty crazy, and fit the bill of extended, that have huge turnouts, and they're very different environments than, like, the standard play. And I think that's ideally what we'll kind of see develop over time, is that you'll have healthy and diverse formats, but at the end of the day, if you're going to Worlds, you're playing extended, or you're not playing extended, you're playing standard.
Gotcha. Yeah. Before before we had official events with Worlds invites and having Gen Con come back, Adepticon Worlds now. We personally here in Chicago, we ran a couple of small tournaments. We sold out extended tournaments because why not, right? It was just like something we could do. People hadn't played much, and they had all these ships from the glory days. They had Azatuk gunships and Phantoms and all the E-wings, whatever. And it's just for me personally, I definitely, some folks, their all-time favorite pilot is like a Guri. There's a few people that come to mind in the Star Viper.
Totally.
Giving them some love, I think, is important. Not to say that we're not right now, and the game is the game. It's still a lot of fun, but yeah, it's just worth asking, just because there are some, I think, some pieces. The TIE Bomber has just been graduated into standard. Can you speak to some things that maybe stand out as, we're looking at this as in terms of reprints? Nothing specific. You don't have to pinpoint, but what's the plan there?
Yeah.
Any loose plans?
Yeah. So like, obviously, there are, I think, a lot of good ships that are not currently in standard that have value and would make great reprint opportunities. It's kind of a multi-level approach, because there's a lot of things that were in 1.0 X-Wing that are not technically in the normal continuity of Star Wars now. They're considered legends. And how those things interact with kind of LFL's vision and where they want to go with Star Wars and the galaxy. We have to be, cognizant and respective of that. And then, of course, there's also just what brings value to the game. Like X-Wing has so many ships, so many different upgrades, so many different pilots. That's great, but design space is very large. Like the sandbox you have, it takes a long time to get to the edge. It is not infinite. There is a finite amount of like space in terms of how you can explore things before you're either replicating the same things over and over, which makes factions feel very samey, or you're just not adding that value that we talked about, right? We don't want to just like throw things in to make things. So I think there's absolutely more reprints that are possible. And I would love to get to, provided that it makes sense from all the different levels. And of course, one of the icky things that we don't typically talk about, because nobody likes it, is the business perspective, right? We have a lot of responsibilities to the folks who sign our checks at Asmodee, and ultimately, just like we have to make sure the communities are healthy and robust at stores so that the game continues to grow, we also have to make sure that it's financially viable for us to continue the game, and that everything's working so that we can continue to work on it, because that's our ultimate goal. But that also requires some smart like business decisions and doing some business cases and things like that. So it's a whole complex network of things, but I absolutely, we've started the process with the TIE Bomber and the YT-2400, and we have a few more in the works. So, I don't think we're going to get to everything. I would be shocked if we saw like
there's a lot
Oztok gunships and some of the other like more like niche kind of things. But ideally, I think we might get to an E-wing, hopefully, maybe someday.
Oh, you can't even say that, even though we don't know for certain.
I know we say that. Zero promises. However, I do think from the continuity standpoint, there's a lot of speculation that you see one in the Ahsoka trailer that's coming out. Yeah. So once we get to watch that show in its entirety, like maybe all of a sudden, it's no longer Legends, and at that point, a barrier is removed. So.
Right. And you bring that up just as a caveat, like we have some already existing standardized Legends, quote unquote Legends, expanded universe people. Kyle Katarn, Janors come to mind. Is that something? Is that just because? I'm just curious. Like maybe someone might be like, well, we talk about stuff that's Legends might not come back into the game, but you point to them. Why is that?
So again, it just kind of comes down to discussions with LFL and really working with them as partners. There are certain things where they're like, no, not right now. Usually, I usually assume it's because they have plans or something's going on with them, or they're in discussion, right? And that plan might be to just eliminate it from the canon. It might be that they're going to reimagine it in a different way. So it is very much case by case. And there are a lot of things that kind of go through the different processes. There are changes that, they decide to make just based on their future plans. And it's our job to make sure that we're laying the best groundwork and being as truthful as possible to the vision that they have for the Star Wars galaxy in itself. So yeah, it's just because something is in Legends doesn't mean it's out of the question. But it is kind of like the first checkbox. It's like, okay, is this cool? Does it work the way that it did before? Do we have to like reevaluate where we're going with that stuff? So it's one of many steps.
Absolutely. I wanted you to be able to speak to that because I think people get a little too crazy with speculation and rumors, and it's just good to talk about TLDR. It's case by case, and it all depends, and not everything's in your control, and that's the way it is, and it makes sense. That's just the way the cookie crumbles. So I want to keep rolling here. So when preparing for a tournament, players have to have a strategy for each of the 4 current scenarios. So you have assault at the satellite array, scramble the transmissions, salvage mission, and of course, chance engagement. Do you see new scenarios being added? And if so, what would the ideal rotation size be in a given, season of play, like points change seasons? And what's your favorite scenario too?
Ooh. So many questions all at once.
I'm sorry, I know. That's like 8, Nick. I know. You can do the favorite at the very end. It's okay.
Well, I definitely think that we'll see new scenarios for X-Wing in the future. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but we did recently make some pretty big changes to the game, and people had some feelings about that.
Yeah.
And that happens every time that you do anything for the game, whether you're coming out with a new scenario packet or new rules changes or even new ships sometimes. And the fact of the matter is, as far as the scenarios are concerned and like the overall picture of the game, we're not 100% that the meta has quite settled and like we know what it wants to do yet. And we always talk about scenario packets and things, like talking with Shick about this one, like 4 is kind of the minimum, right? Like you want to have 4 missions, because if you get like a 16-person tournament, then you're going to play 4 rounds. You play each scenario once, and that's kind of perfect. Ideally, you have 5 or 6. I think 6 is kind of the top end. And that way, you don't necessarily know exactly which scenarios you're going to play. You're going to play 4 of them. And if you're playing in a larger event, you can get through 6 rounds before you kind of double up on them. So I think that's kind of like the hope. The dream would be that we have 6 that are good and that most importantly are unique. So like, if we want to talk about like the crates, the supply mission. So we could make some changes to that, and we could reorient how that mission works, and we wouldn't want to slap in another copy of the same mission that just works differently because they kind of have the same solution. Really, the interesting thing about having multiple scenarios is that different lists work in different ways. So sometimes you want to have a list that has some speedy ships that can grab things and then get away. Other times you want big heavy hitters that are going to be hard to remove from where they want to control, things like that. And if you have too many scenarios that work in the same way, then suddenly your list skew changes to say like, oh, well, 3 out of the 6 scenarios favor fast ships and then only 2 favor slow ships. So I'll take all fast ships and then I'll try and fit for that 4th scenario. And there we go. And then all of a sudden you're playing to a meta instead of playing to the game itself. So we really want to make sure that each scenario is unique and does focus on some aspect of the gameplay that we find interesting or that is going to be fun for players. And so we're always looking at that, and there should be some updates coming in the future, but I would not expect them in the immediate future, but it's definitely something that's on our radar.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing, right, is just I don't think Plummer would disagree, or most folks would disagree, that typically with a new competitive season, you want to see some updates to the competitive packet, right? Like the tournament document should have some tweaks to adjust for, people figuring stuff out, because you always want to be asking questions. And if something is quote unquote solved, then you want to throw in a little bit of a monkey wrench to change things around. Scenarios are a great way to incentivize things that are underplayed by simply making them a little bit better in the scenario, right? Your slower maneuverable bombers and their ability to drop bombs, not particularly great if all of your scenarios just focus on like flying around the edge of the board, finding the perfect kill shot, and then dealing as much damage as possible with a rapid like elite strike. However, you start sticking folks around very specific objectives that don't move and saying, hey, you have to kind of control these zones. Now all of a sudden those bombers know where your opponent probably wants to be. So dropping a bomb at an opportune time that's going to catch multiple enemy ships in its blast radius and like be a present threat, despite the fact that they may not be the best dogfighters. You know, that's a way to give them relevance that you just can't do through points. You can't do through like without significant changes to a dial. You know, I can't make a Y-wing compete with a TIE interceptor when it comes to a straight out dogfight. It's not even how it's supposed to work. The Y-wing is supposed to be a flying brick. So how do you create situations where the Y-wing strengths can be played to and can be built around? And that's the exciting thing about scenarios. That's what makes scenarios so critical to games like this, because they give you that freedom and flexibility to then challenge the players to say, okay, you have all these tools, you have these 4 questions. What are you going to do with them? How are you going to build for them? Do you want to just maximize for 1 or 2 scenarios? Be like, I am unbeatable at this scenario. I am 80% unbeatable at this scenario, and I'm going to really have to try hard on these other scenarios, right? Or do you build a list where you're like, hey, if I play well and my opponent makes some mistakes, I have a 70% chance of coming out on top, right? And it's just going to be through my skill and a little and more luck that I succeed, but I have a balanced all comers list. And these are the things that, you know, have been mainstays of traditional like hobby miniatures tabletop games forever. The idea of scenario play influencing your list construction and stuff. And for us, it was one of those big glaring omissions in terms of like what X-Wing needed to like go to that next level. And so I think, you know, our desire, as Plummer said, is to add some more variety and interest to that. But we first have to see how the initial 4 are affecting gameplay, how people are doing it. And we need a full season at least of competitive play to really determine that, especially now that, you know, the other changes, because we spun a lot of dials all at once, have kind of like settled down, and people have started to you know, get into a groove, as it were. And I think this year will be really fun to watch and really interesting to see how that all plays out. So I'm very excited for Adepticon next year to kind of see where we end up, and then take that data and all the other great like response and stuff that we have, and go back into the workshop and come back out with probably an adjustment for the next season.
And I just kind of want to build off what Shick said. Like, I think something that's really interesting about that, when you talk about like, I'm going to build to be strong to this scenario, but I could build to be strong to this scenario or this one, is that at the root of that is that everyone's favorite ship is probably good at least one of the scenarios. So you can fly your favorite ship and know that it's going to perform for you in one of your 4 games. And I think that's just a great feeling as a person that loves B-Wings, that I know that if I fly a B-Wing, it's going to be good in at least one of my games.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about list building around specific scenario matchups. I took Lucana Wedge to top 16 at Worlds somehow, or not Worlds, Gen Con, and I just thought that was hilarious and incredible. It was. I don't know why I did that to myself, but it was a good time. It was a good time.
Yeah, and I mean that goes back to you can min max through pure stats and turn 0. But there also should be a question or a very heavy dose of what is the player skill, right? And scenarios, because of their diverse because they challenge you in different ways, and they make purely great numbers things not as good, because you know they can't necessarily flex their perfect strength when it comes to one versus the other. They give the player more agency to say, hey, I'm really good with this list, I can adapt to it. And a player who can't adapt to it, you know, probably won't see success against them, even if they're playing with better stuff. And that's the heart of, to me, that's the heart of Worlds, right? Not can you solve the game? It's can you solve the game in a way that lets you triumph over your opponent, right? You always want that balance curve, right?
Absolutely.
Like everything's kind of right there, and how big the curve is different based on who you're talking to, because it's a philosophy standpoint. We like to keep the curve pretty close if we can, but the more things you have in a game, the further apart that balance curve kind of grows, because it's just the natural state of not everything can be at the 50% mark.
Yeah.
So then you go, okay, well, how do we make player skill important? If I had my druthers, player skill would be at least 60% or more of your success in terms of being able to conquer all 4 scenarios, right? Like build a good list, but if you get really good with your list, you should be able to overcome somebody who doesn't have the same skill level as you flying their ships in the way that you've learned to fly yours.
Absolutely. This has been a really interesting part of the conversation. And we got 2 more questions left for you guys. But without you guys, I just want you to rattle off what your favorite scenario is. Just, you don't even have to say why.
My favorite is I forget the name of it, the supply crate one.
Salvage mission.
Salvage mission, yeah. And the reason that I love that one is because when we were playtesting it, we were like right in the middle of, we were kind of like at the end of COVID, so I was still doing a lot of playtesting at my house and using my kids to like help out. And we just had a blast with blasting the crates off of each other. And to me, it's so fun because it's somewhat variance in terms of you're fishing for the crits at the time. And we had a couple different like iterations we went through where how you could lose the crate. But it was such a fun thematic experience of like somebody pick up the box and then the other player would devote a lot of effort to shoot the box off of them. And then they'd pick up the box, and it was a good back and forth, and we just had a blast with it. So I think that kind of just fun and that enjoyment really stuck well with me, and it's always been a favorite of mine.
Yeah, for me, it's got to be Assault at the Satellite Array, just for the simple fact that it's the first one that I started working on, and so it was kind of playing through that for the first time, and it has such this like crazy idea of objectives that don't move, that your ships that have to keep moving want to be near, and like even just saying it sounded unhinged and wild, and we're like, let's try it, let's see what happens with it, and it like kind of opened the door, right? Like we played that first game and we finished it, and like I just remember looking at Pagani and being like, you want to re-rack, you want to go again, you want to do it? And we did. We immediately just played another game, and that was the moment for me when I was like, okay, this works, this is great. And so that one will always hold a special place in my heart because I think it kind of paved the way for scenario play in general.
And Assault's also a really good one for people who aren't familiar with scenario play to it's like it's just King of the Hill. The big ships count for 2, the small ones count for 1, and blow people up.
At the end of the day, across miniatures games, there aren't that many scenarios. There's like hold the thing, there's take the thing, there's keep the thing away, and then there's take the thing and hold the thing. And that's about it. Like there are different ways to do it. There's different ways to take those ingredients, much like tacos and burritos. It's a lot of the same stuff put together different ways, and that's a lot of the ways that you can make scenarios. But yeah, like there are some touchstones, and I think Assault Satellite Array hits that King of the Hill, like take and hold kind of touchstone of scenarios in miniatures game, and does it really well.
Love that. Sure. All right, we'll keep on trucking along.
So as part of the new rules that were released last year, we saw several ship abilities and pilot abilities get an errata to reflect the new rule set. The first thing that comes to mind for me is the Nantex ability. How do you identify abilities that need an errata to remain balanced in the game?
That's a big one. So like I said a little bit before, like we recently made these big sweeping changes to the game, and with that you did see quite a bit of errata, which is something that generally we try to avoid, because for us the gold standard is that you go to the store, you buy the product, you get the card, you read the card, you know what it does. Like that's the dream, that's what everyone wants. But so with this big kind of shake up to how the game rules worked, there was kind of this new bar added for when there would be an errata, because generally speaking, I think the bar for we will definitely errata this card is this does not work. And more so like this breaks the game. If something breaks the game, we will absolutely errata it. We need to fix that problem to keep everything else working healthily. And then this is kind of weird. And sometimes, we'll look at some wording and we'll say, oh, that's very off, it's very misleading, et cetera. And that might get an errata. But anything beyond that, we're usually not looking to errata. Now, the difference being that we made this big sweeping set of changes, we said, why don't we just take a look at the cards and see where there are issues and kind of go with that. And like our first rule with the changes was anything that like makes the dial not sacred is out the window. So anything that was going to like look at your opponent's dial or change your dial after you've set it or anything like that, we just put it on the chopping block and said those just aren't going to be in the game anymore. And that was just kind of a hard, fast rule. And then from those, we kind of looked at them and we said, do we need to change all these, or can we just remove them? And then with these other changes, like to range 0 attacks and such, like what abilities need a rework so that they can still exist and be in this new world, this new sandbox that is the game, and work well. So we went through and we made a lot of changes like that. And then specifically, you're talking about the Nantex. that's one that had just been floating around for so long that people have been talking about, like, if this wording worked like this, then XYZ would work better. And while we were there, we decided to take a look at it and talk with the playtesters and run through some things internally. And so sometimes you just change things so that they work better. Like the Nantex was that case, the ailerons on the TIE Reapers, like with the way that the new rules work, now you don't have to just kind of fly into your own stuff and blow up on accident all the time. So anything that we can do that's going to like make the game work as we intend. Obviously, because we changed some things in the game, we had to do a lot more errata in that time. But from like moving forward, you should probably only expect to see an errata on a card if it just doesn't work.
That's great to hear. And I think everybody, wants to know that. Hear that you guys aren't planning to be errata happy because, as you mentioned, it's just too hard to know what's going on at a certain point.
Yeah, it's exhausting.
Yeah, absolutely. For everybody involved. Nobody wants to go through that, for sure.
So Atomic Mass Games is clearly a big proponent of the hobbyist element of miniature gaming. How do you emphasize that within a game that has pre-painted and assembled miniatures?
I mean, I think the biggest way is that we just show people, hey, these things look amazing out of the package and right on the table, and that's awesome. But if you want to, try your hand at doing a couple of cosmetic upgrades, if you want to swap your red stripes to green stripes or pink stripes or whatever, like here's how you do it, right? And so we've done some hobby streams and the like on that, and we've just shown people that it's within their ability to go in and make their ships their own, if they wanted and they choose to do that. And, that was happening even before Atomic Mass Games ever took over the wonderful game of X-Wing. Like, I remember playing in 1.0 and seeing on the message boards and all that different stuff, like the community boards, people's just incredible repaints, And I was like, this is so cool. What a fantastic idea, and people just taking ownership of it. And I think that's, for us, that's one of the really kind of beneficial or neat things about having X-Wing as part of the overall catalog for the studio, is that it is a great inroads into hobby miniatures gaming, because it gives you a lot of the standard foundations of a traditional hobby tabletop miniatures game, but it removes some of that hobby like barrier to people. And so we just kind of play off of that, right? We use that to our advantage to say, we know you love Star Wars if you're playing X-Wing, so likely you're going to see a Legion or a Shatterpoint mini at some point pop across our feeds because you're waiting for the next cool X-Wing thing. And you're like, oh my gosh, look at that Luke Skywalker or that Boba Fett. That's super dope. And whereas if you saw it without any experience with, your X-Wing, you'd be like, woof, there's a lot of stuff I'd have to learn and some skills I'd get to develop. Now it's like, well, hey, I've already done this once. Maybe I'll just try repainting this extra A-Wing that I have to see if I like it, and if I can do it. And you probably will have great success with it because it's paint within the lines in a lot of ways. And then that gives you the confidence to say, let's explore more, let's view what else is out there in the Star Wars galaxy that I can play. So I think in that way, it's very cool.
Yeah.
You bring that up. Like my first foray into the hobby painting was getting I had I don't know how I have 4 Adas, but I have 4 Adas. Will I ever fly 4 Adas? I don't know. But I'm like, I want to paint Anakin Skywalker's Ada, and I painted it. And I'm like, oh, this doesn't look half bad for my first miniature, and now I have an entire table of paints and Legion minis that is just over falling off the
Facebook,
table.
so I'm following his. He sends me pictures too. He's doing a good job.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I think there's something really special about an X-Wing repaint. And like my Galactic Republic stuff is all repainted. It's all green and yellow, and it's super rad. It has pink jets in the back. It looks really cool. And then I have a couple Rebel ships that I painted. Like I have an Ahsoka Tano A-Wing because it's my favorite ship. And I painted it orange, and then down the side panels, it's blue and white stripes like the Leku, and it's super dope. But like the thing about X-Wing repaints is like, I didn't have to do that. It looks great right out of the package. So like when I see someone that has repainted their X-Wing ship, I'm like, they love that ship. They love that ship. That's their ship that does well for them, or that's a specific character that they really care about. And like, for me personally, like I love painting miniatures. I love painting miniatures more than I love playing miniatures games because I've done it my entire life, like 33 years at this point. And so when I see that someone has like taken the time to paint their ship, I'm like, that means something to them, and that's super cool. And I want to see what that ship does on the table. Like, I want to see why it is that they love it. And I think, I don't know, for me, it's just kind of this like part of the holistic hobby is that, you know, seeing what people have worked on and what they're excited about tells you something about them, tells you about something about the game you're about to play. And I just think it's super cool.
I think that's a fantastic way to look at X-Wing repaints.
Yeah, you're not intimidated to if you're a novice and you want to just pick up the core set and you want to see if you like the game and get into it and play with the community, you can by just bringing your components out of the box and playing, and there's no judgment, there's no mention, hey, like that's not painted to standard, but you know, to our standards it's not painted, period. There's just, you know, there's that level of intimidation doesn't exist. And not to say it's bad for any other game that where you do need to paint things, but it's not easy for everybody. And I think that is a natural barrier for some folks getting into to a given game. And the fact that X-Wing doesn't have that barrier, I think, is a really unique kind of, it's very special, right? Because how many other games do that? It's very, very unique part of why we love the game, of the many reasons. Yeah. Well, that honestly, guys, that does conclude the interview. I do want to throw it over to you guys for any shout outs as well as just last words for the community. If you have anything to say to all the X-Wing fam out there, throw to you.
Really just thank you for your passion for the game. Like, it's so cool to watch people be excited and go through like the road to Worlds and be excited for new championship kits and new OP kits, and like all the posts that I see all the time about people excited about what's coming up for X-Wing and what's next. Like, thank you. It's so amazing to see such a lively and invested community that wants to play something that we are lucky enough to work on and continue to make for you. So enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my standpoint, right, like it's always just reiterating that it's a journey and we're going to walk it for as long as possible. And as being a journey, there's no end destination, right? So there's always places to explore. There's always a future like expansion or a points update or whatever, right? Like Plummer mentioned errata and things like that. We're always actively looking at how we're going to make the best game possible. And that doesn't mean shaking the snow globe every time somebody has a bad experience. It's being very calculated and very considerate about, okay, we want this game to be as great as it is now in 10 years and 20 years and whatever, right? How are we going to accomplish that? And so we're a lot like gardeners in that we've inherited this really amazing like living ecosystem that is X-Wing, and it's our job to kind of tend to it, to nurture it, to water it, to help it grow in a successful fashion. And we're gonna screw up, right? I'd be the first to tell you we're gonna make mistakes and we're gonna make errors, and you know, I can't ever promise that that's not going to be the case because we're human, right? People are not perfect, and perfection is just a foolish dragon to chase. But I can promise you that every time we do make a mistake or we stumble, we're going to learn from it and we're going to fix it, right? And we're going to take that knowledge and we're going to apply it to the next time. So and that's just I was in teaching before I wound up in getting into the tabletop industry, and that was always the biggest proponent. It's like you don't know things until you learn them. And so the idea being there is like, you know, we're all very aware of our shortcomings, and we're going to do everything we can to like adjust and correct, and we're going to get better from it. And so constant journey of improvement. And we're very excited that folks are passionate and want to be on that journey with us. So we're looking forward to what's next.
Absolutely. Thank you guys. And, you know, just to the X-Wing community, you know, change is always difficult when you've gotten used to something for a long time. And at this point now, we've had 2 Adepticons with the newer version of X-Wing, and you know, obviously the turnout, the excitement, the buzz is high, and you know, we're all still here. We're having a great time, and we do want to give you guys credit because one, we know it's not easy. We know there's a lot of pressure and there's, you know, not a lot of time, and with COVID and, you know, just a lot of things happening, it's been crazy. So you guys are doing a great job, and we just want to make sure that you are, you're appreciated. I hope you do know that. And we thank you for being here and making the time and the effort overall with the game and with the community here.
Yeah, much appreciated. We'll continue to try to earn all of those good accolades.
And thanks so much for having us. It was a blast chatting with you guys.
Yeah,
thanks so much.
Absolutely. It's so wonderful that you all do this and put your time and energy into it. I mean, like the community itself is fantastic, but it's folks like you doing podcasts and all the different like community outreach, running events, like each and every person out there, right? You have and that's the cool thing. You have the ability to take ownership of the game you love and absolutely grow it to an incredible spectacle, or, really hinder it based on your attitude and the way in which you kind of like interact with people. It's a social game. There's a person across the table from you. Never forget that person's there, right? It's all of our responsibilities to make sure that we're having fun and seeing success where we want to see it. And the fact that you put in all this work it's amazing, guys. So we really appreciate it.
Of course, it's been a blast. So yeah, check out Shatterpoint, the new hit game out, the new Star Wars miniatures game by Atomic Mass Games. You can go on to Asmodee or Atomic Mass Games to learn more and buy the core sets and expansions. Follow Atomic Mass Games on social media, including Twitch. If you want to watch the paint streams these guys were talking about. And of course, do you guys have social handles you like to promote? Just always like to give you the chance if you do.
I always just point people right back to Atomic Mass Games because I don't know nothing.
Gotcha. Good. Well, good. That's a good thing, I would say. So you got social media where you can is always good. All right, you guys have a great weekend. Thank you all. Thank you for your time.